Hello again, dear students. This is Mr. Abdurrahman again with part 2 of the finance topic. In this topic, we will talk about the different sources available as finance methods. In chapter or in the part 2, sorry, I'm gonna focus on talking about mainly the internal and the external finance. This will be discussed in part 3. Okay, so internal and external finances will be our focus on the source of finance. So, as I said, any business, whether it's a new business, old, large, they need finance to engine things for them. And to do that, they need these finance sources can divide into a few categories. I'm gonna start talking about the first type of them, which is the internal finance. Regarding the internal finance, and just to do a quick introduction about each one of them, this is the internal. As for the internal finance is obtained most of the time obtained within the business itself. Means that this source of finance will be provided from the business or the company itself. They're not gonna take it from an outside source. As for the external, from it is obtained from outside sources or outside firms or organizations. Just to distinguish the difference between both of them. Okay, this is for the internal finance and for the external finance source. As for the internal, it will be divided into few things or few types. We're gonna talk about each one of them. First internal finance method is something called retained profit or retained profit. Retained profit is talking about the idea is that the company will use part of the profit of the business, not all of it, of course, and this profit will be something different from the share of the owners. So the profit will be kept in the business, and after the owners taking their share, what is left from the profit will be injected in the business again as a capital. They were not gonna just put it uh, in the stores, wherever it is. They're gonna store it in the banks, or no, they're gonna use it as a capital. And most of the time, they refer to this type of internal finance as a plug bag profit. So just to highlight what we talked about. After owners take their share of profit, what is left used as finance. And sometimes, as I said, it's called plug back profit. This is to the side here. So retained profit is this is about the let's talk about the advantages of it. The pros of this method. There's two advantages of this method. Number one, you don't have to repay, for the owners, because it's becoming something. This return profit will not be repaid as if it's a loan. It will be part of the capital. So this is the first advantage. Uh, not be paid as loans. It's not something that you repay as loans that you uh, if you're taking a loan from a bank, it's another type of finance. But as I said, it's not repaid as bank loans. This is the one advantage. Advantage number one. And the second advantage, that no interest rate to pay. This is the second advantage. You don't have to pay interest rate because it's not a loan. It's just a capital that is raised from the business. So this is about the first method here, or uh, first internal finance method. Beside these advantages, of course, as anything that we study in business, there's always disadvantages. And the disadvantages of the retained profit, there is like three of them. Number one, let's say that you are a new business. If you are a new business, actually you don't have a retained profit. So new businesses don't have it. They don't have retained profit because they just started. They don't have profit. Maybe they don't have even any profit. So that's why it's not ideal to use this method to finance new businesses. The second disadvantage about this is sometimes this profit, as I said, it might be small to fund as a finance, especially if the small firm is seeking expansions. Uh, profit profit might be low to expand, and we're talking about small firms, as I said. We're talking about small firms here. This is the second disadvantage, or the second problem regarding this method, this internal finance method. And the last disadvantage is that sometimes by keeping more profit, it will reduce the payment to the owners. It's like that the dividends of for the shareholders or the owners will be less. This is it's like it's a method of finance that is not preferred by the owners. So profit keeping profit to finance may reduce owners, which is we call them, as if you remember, the shareholders, dividends. That's why it's considered a disadvantage. So the retained profit is here, and we said that there's two advantages, and there is like three disadvantages here. Okay, that's about the retained profit. Let's talk about the second type of internal finance. We're going to talk about something called the sale of existing assets. The sale of existing assets. Sale of existing what the sale of existing assets means. It's basically talking about the idea that you're selling something that belongs to your company but you don't use it anymore, like an old building or a surplus of equipment that you don't need anymore. That kind of things. If you're selling them in any kind of auction, it's considered as an example for financing your business with you. So, uh, items, items of value, no longer needed for business. Example for that, let's say surplus equipment. This is an example for that. And this method has its benefits and disadvantages as any other method for financing a business. Let's talk about the pros first, or the advantages. Pros, number one, there's two of them actually. It considered a method that makes the capital that is tied up to the business without any use uh, beneficial. So it makes a better capital of the tied up items. And the second advantage is that it does not increase any kind of debt on the business. So the first advantage is that makes better of capital tied up to business. And the second advantage is that no increase in business businesses debt. This is the second advantage. Let's talk about the disadvantages of this method. The disadvantages, there's two of them. Number one, the bad thing about selling these kind of items that no longer is needed, there's no certain way to say when they're gonna be sold. So the amount raised from them never, you cannot, let's say that you need an immediate amount of money. You cannot count on this method, so it takes time to sell these assets. And the second disadvantage, that the source of finance is not available to the businesses. Uh, how to say? Sorry, I'm gonna rephrase it. The source of finance is not going to be available for new businesses because new businesses they do not have even the surplus asset to sell. So disadvantages is going to be mentioned here. Takes time to be sold these items. Takes time to sell these assets. We never know when. And second point is that new firms or small firms, we're gonna say that new businesses don't have surplus asset to sell. So it's not ideal for small businesses. This is about the second method. This is retained profit number one. This is number two, as I said, of existing assets. And as for the points of advantage and disadvantage, this is advantage one and two, and this is disadvantage one and two. Okay, let's jump to the next source of finance. We're gonna talk about something called the sale of inventories. Number three. It's gonna be the sale of inventories. Sale of inventories. It's talking about the idea that a business getting rid of a huge portion of the products that is available in its inventories, and it's reducing. When you're doing that, actually, you are reducing the opportunity cost coming from paying for that store. Okay, so just to add some points about it. And it's sorry. This reduces opportunity cost between two brackets use storage cost when you have a high level of inventory. Say that you have like extra inventory and you don't need, so you can benefit from that by selling these available inventories. But there's one thing to keep in mind as a disadvantage, that sometimes if you are not careful about reducing the inventory level, you might end up by having unhappy customers because there's not enough good for them to be sold. Okay, so let's be careful to avoid unsatisfying customers when no enough goods to sell them. That's the point from this. That's the advantage. Disadvantage of this point. So this is about the third method, number three, and then number here, number three, sale of inventories. And there's, as I said, one disadvantage regarding this method. Let's talk about the other way of finance as an internal finance. We're gonna go to another method, which is the owner's saving. This method is applied to the sole traders and the partnership style, not on the limited and the big companies. If you remember when we talking about the forms of firms, owners, savings. In this method, we're talking about the sole traders, trader or partnership. In this method, and these businesses, since they will follow this method because they cannot seek bank loans, for example, because they don't cannot ask, for example, sole trader and the partnership. If you remember, they have a different legal form than the limited and the public limited companies, so they depend on saving, moving the savings into the capital, since they have an uncorporated business. And since that if you remember that the financial body, they are not separated from the financial body of their businesses, they are not separated from the business, and they will be suitable for them to do that. The advantages of this, saving, I'm gonna talk about pros first. First advantage of this uh, can be, since you're using your saving, can be available quickly to fund anything. This is the first advantage. And second advantage, no interest to pay because you're using your own money as a sole trader. No interest to pay. Let's talk about the disadvantages. Disadvantages, there's two of them. These savings can be very low. Savings can be low and cannot be enough. They're not going to be enough to fund whatever that you're trying to fund. Also, it will increase the risk for the owner or the entrepreneur of this business. Increases risk taken for owners by owners. This is the second disadvantage. This is sorry. This is, should be number three. gonna be number 4. This is the fourth method as an internal finance method. And after that, we're gonna talk about. We're done talking about the internal as a method, guys. This is all you need to know about the internal methods of funding. So the internal finance, which is obtained with the business itself, there's 4 methods: retained profit, sales of existing assets, sale of inventories. Okay, let's talk about the external. I'm gonna highlight this. Both as 1 and 2, as called as 1 and 2 as well. Let's go to the external finance. We said that external finance, talking about the idea that funding the business from outside. Funding the business from outside, talking about external finance as a concept. The first type that we're gonna talk about of external, we're gonna talk about the issues, the issued shares. What does issued shares means? Issued shares. Issued shares, if you remember when we talked about limited companies, when they're putting their shares so they can gain some, when they can ask their family members, if you're using a limited company, not public, you can ask your friends to put some kind of invest in the business and they will have some shares. So it's only possible. This is about we're gonna talk about it. This is only for limited companies. You cannot do that as a sole trader or as a whatever other form. Okay. What do you need to know about the issuing of shares? There's 2 advantages to discuss. The first advantage is a permanent source of capital. It means that as you get the money for selling that share, it will belong to the business. It's considered as a permanent capital, and you don't have to repay for the shareholders for that. Okay. The second advantage, you don't need to pay any kind of interest. Okay. So this is the pros. It's considered as permanent. Permanent source of finance, of capital, between 2 brackets. No need to repay to shareholders. And the second advantage is that, as I said, no interest to pay to be paid. This is the advantage. Let's talk about the disadvantages. Disadvantages of this method. There's 3 of them. The thing is that the dividends of the shareholders by following this method will be paid after the tax is applied on the profit, which is very, very bad for the owners of the business. While the interest, if you are taking a loan while you're doing this method, this interest will be paid before the taxation. This is the advantage, the first disadvantage. Also, shareholders will be expecting, due to this method, they will always expecting some kind of dividends, which is can be annoying to a business manager. And number 3, the company's ownership could be changed uh, uh, by hands if there's many shares are sold. So it's like that. As I said, you don't control if there's many people buying this. If you're financing by using this method, the disadvantage is that you will losing control because there's more people buying share, and if they bought more shares, they will control the business, do the higher percentage. So these are the advantages. Disadvantages, we said that the dividends paid after tax, while interest paid before tax. Second disadvantage is that shareholders expect these dividends, otherwise they will not be happy, which is considered a disadvantage. And actually, even will tie your finance because it will go to the shareholders' pockets. And the last disadvantage, we say that ownership of company could change if many shares sold. This is the thing that we are referring to here. So this is the first external finance method, number one, which is the issued shares. We said that there's pros and cons. First advantage, this one. Number two, disadvantage, the advantage number two. As for the disadvantages, there's three of them. Okay, that's about the issues. Of shares. An arrow, and we're gonna go here. Let's talk about number two. Number two, the bank loans. Let's talk about the bank loans. They're considered the second biggest or most important way to fund any business. The bank loan is some kind of money that obtained from the bank and will be repaid after a period of time beside the interest. So, a sum of money paid, obtained from banks and need to be paid back after a period plus interest. This is just to define it very quickly. Okay, what about the pros and the cons of this method? The first thing we're going to talk about the good side or the advantages of taking money from bank. Number one, it's usually quick to arrange. This is the first advantage. The second advantage, that the longevity or the period of time that will be asked to repay can vary. So length, time to repay can vary. And the last advantage of this method is that large companies easier for them to get money from the banks, and beside that they will get very low rate of interest on their loans because they are borrowing huge amounts of money. So sorry for this, I had something. So large firms benefit from low interest rates since they borrow large sums of money. This is the advantages of using the bank loans as a way to finance the business. Let's talk about the disadvantages. Mainly, there's two of them. The first advantage, that you have to repay. Eventually, you need to repay plus the interest. So, eventually, must you pay the debt plus interest. And the second advantage, that most of the banks they will seek some kind of security or collateral if you cannot pay or repay the debt. That's why most of the banks they insist before giving you the money for any funding that you have to provide some kind of security or it's called collateral to repay in any way. They might ask you to use the firm's property if you fail paying, or if you are a small business, they might ask you to repay back by giving them your house. So this is the second disadvantage. Banks ask for security or collateral to get loans. To ensure that debt is repaid. As an example, as I said, you might ask for even example firms, cars, firms buildings, building can be used as a collateral. This is about the bank loan as a method. Method number two as an external finance method. Number two. These are the advantages. 1, 2, 3, and there's 2 disadvantages. Let's talk about the other external finance methods or types. There's 2 of them, actually there's 3 of them. We're gonna talk about the concept of selling something called debentures. Debentures is some kind of unsecured certificates that can be used as a sort of money. So number 3, we're going to talk about selling debentures. As I said, they are considered as long-term loan certificates. So what do you need to know about them? Now, first we're going to talk about the pros and then the cons. The first, they have one advantage and disadvantage. First advantage, or the only advantage, that the debentures can be raised a very long-term finance. So let's say that you want to finance for a business, but you're not gonna make huge profit before a few years. It's very beneficial to do that. So debentures can raise very long-term finance. Example for that, even for 20 years. This is the advantage for this method. Let's talk about disadvantages. Disadvantages, it's a loan. It's a loan. Since it's a loan, it means interest must be paid. It means that must be paid plus interest must be paid. This is about the selling of debenture. So insurance, let's do some. Remember here, bank loans and the selling of debentures. There's one advantage and there's one disadvantage. Let's talk about another one. It's about the factoring of debts. This is another concept, factoring of debts. Factoring, sorry. Factoring debts. This is another external source of finance. Factor or debt. Debts. Factor. What's this concept is about? It's about that sometimes the debtor is some kind of customer, and this customer owes some money for the firm for any kind of goods that he bought. So what these debt factors will do is taking the right of the firm of seeking this money from that customer. They are some kind of agencies. They buy the claim on the debtor from the firm for immediate cash. The only thing about this that the, it's about how they are making money from it. The debt factors, they are taking a percentage of the claim or the money that the firm claiming from its customer. It's like they're taking 20% out of a 100, and they will represent the firm for taking that. They will give back the 80%, but for them they will take 20%. So that's as a factor's profit, and they will collect the price. So to define it here, we'll talk about it. So debtor debt factors is are specialized agencies that buys um, buy claims on debtors of firms. So this is the definition. So you know what we're talking about. So this is considered as a way of financing. As a firm, you will finance yourself with an 80% of the money that you seek from the customer. So it's considered as a way of financing in any way. Let's talk about the advantages of this and then the disadvantages. The advantage that you can get immediate cash available for you as a business, immediate cash available due to that. The only bad thing about it that you are not getting 100% of debt that a customer owes you, because percentage of it is going to be as a fees for the debt factor. This is the disadvantage about this method. Or method number, oh, I forgot to remember this one. Number 4, this is number 3, and this is method number 4. The debt factors. We have one advantage and we have one disadvantage. uh, let's talk about another way of external finance. We'll talk now about the government, how to be funded as government, the subsidies and that kind of things. We're going to talk about grants or subsidies from agencies. one of them is a government. This is one of them, the government. As an example, these pros, and then prepare the cons. So what's the advantage of this? The first advantage that you need to know is that these grants is not repaid. You don't have to repay them. These grants are not not needed to be repaid. That's the good thing. But where's the bad thing? Or you can say that the restriction, or say there's something called as a sting attached in it, because sometimes the government will give you that as a grant, but let's say, for example, they would ask you to locate in a particular area where there is a low rate of employment or there's a high rate of unemployment. So stings attached to these grants, forcing firms, forcing firms, for example, to locate in specific area. This is the disadvantage in this method. This is the external finance method or type number 5, the grants or the subsidies. There is one more way of finance which is different from all of these. It's called the microfinance. What is the microfinance, guys? Microfinance. It's talking about the idea of funding poor countries or poor people in developing countries. The microfinance. What you need to know about the microfinance is some kind of financial services provided for poor people. Between two brackets, small loans. And most of the time, these microfinance are not provided by the traditional, not provided by traditional banks. Most of the traditional banks will refuse to fund or to microfinance. Why is that? Because it's not providing high rate of profit for them. As you don't forget that banks seeking profit too, guys. Since they are seeking profit, it means that they will not do anything like this. The microfinance is something that's not providing high profit for them, so that's why the traditional banks stay from this kind of practice. So what's the advantage of this? And before that, we're gonna do some. Before that, I'm gonna talk about a few things. This practice is applied in developing countries where people are poor. Traditional banks refuse to fund poor people. Even for business, even if even for business, it's not like that they don't want to give the money because they are begging for it. But even if these poor people trying to make business with it, they will refuse to give them because, as I said, their business is going to be very small. And let's talk about the reasons why. I mean, Okay, all this, Mr. Why? Why uh, these traditional banks refuse to do that? Basically, because of a few reasons here I'm gonna mention. First reason is that size of loans small and not profitable for banks. This is the first reason why traditional banks do not provide this kind of is not providing microfinance. Also, beside that, poor people cannot cannot give any collaterals to secure the loan. They don't have anything. They're poor. So this is why banks refuse to do that, because basically, guys, high risk, as I said, high risk to get the loan. That's why they refuse to do that. Just to add few things to this discussion, I'm gonna move this a little bit here. So, okay, Mr. Abdurrahman, microfinance is a good thing for poor people if the traditional banks refuse to do that. So, who is doing that? There is specialized institutions that is set up this kind of finance. There's many of them actually. One of them is as an example, is the Garmin Bank in Bangladesh. And these institutions would provide the money for the poor people to start their businesses. And this is the concept of the microfinance, guys, which is considered as a method of external payment or external finance. Number six, or the sixth method, microfinance. Okay, so guys, this is about this topic. In this topic, we talked about the sources of finance, but we focused on two things. We focused on the internal finance and the external finance. In part three, I'm gonna talk about the short term. I'm gonna talk about the I'm gonna talk about the short term and long term finance. But for now, you know the differences between the at least you know the differences between the internal and the external finance. There is like one, two, three, four methods of internal finance, and there's like six methods of external finance. I hope that was beneficial for you and you understand this very complex topic. Um, as I always do, I'm gonna see you in other videos, guys, and I want to thank you for viewing. Take care for now. See you in part three. Good night.